Right now, in a hangar outside Moscow, engineers are tearing a perfectly good jumbo jet to pieces, on purpose. 2 Boeing 747-400 freighters, 6 Boeing 737-800s, cut up for parts so other jets can keep flying. The airline doing this once carried 138 million passengers in a single year, 15% of everyone flying on Earth. The largest airline in history. This is Aeroflot, Russia's flag carrier, born in 1923. So how does the biggest airline ever built end up stripping its own jets for scrap? The answer is not sanctions. It is a hidden logic that has saved this airline 3 times. 3 times it should have died, and it still flies the hammer and sickle of a country that no longer exists. Andrei Tupolev built some of his greatest aircraft as a prisoner. In the late 1930s, Stalin's secret police arrested him, accused him of selling secrets to the enemy, and locked him inside a design bureau, a prison with drawing boards. He sketched warplanes behind bars. When they finally let him out, he became the most important aircraft designer the Soviet Union ever produced. One of his machines changed Aeroflot forever, the Tupolev Tu-104. It was, in plain terms, a bomber with a passenger cabin bolted on, loud, cramped, unforgiving if you flew it wrong. But it flew, and the timing was extraordinary. Britain's de Havilland Comet, the world's first jet airliner, had been grounded after a run of fatal mid-air breakups. So from 1956 to 1958, the Tu-104 was the only jet airliner carrying passengers anywhere on the planet. If you boarded a jet in those years, you boarded a Soviet one. Tupolev's bureau kept pushing. The Tu-114 became the biggest airliner in the world, and the Tu-144 flew supersonic before Concorde ever left the ground. But that same machine showed the other side of Soviet ambition. It tore itself apart in the sky at the Paris Air Show in 1973. It limped into passenger service in 1977, then was pulled within about a year after another disaster. Brilliant engineering, brutal reality. That tension runs through the entire story. Still, Aeroflot did not just grow, it exploded. By 1990, it connected 3,600 towns and cities, reached more than 100 countries, and carried 138 million people in a year. No airline on Earth came close. But that scale was hiding something strange, because Aeroflot was not really an airline at all. Think about what an airline normally is: a company. It sells seats, competes for routes, tries to turn a profit. Aeroflot did none of that. It was an arm of the Soviet state, a government ministry with wings. A crop needs spraying in Kazakhstan. That was Aeroflot. A patient needs evacuating from Siberia. Aeroflot. Aerial surveys, forest firefighting, polar expeditions, military transport, mapping the Arctic. All of it flew under the same blue and silver badge. By the late 1980s, the organization ran around 1,300 airliners, thousands of smaller aircraft, and employed roughly 500,000 people. There was no rival, because rivals were illegal. One advertising slogan from the era summed it up perfectly: fly Aeroflot, as if you had any other option. That is why the numbers look impossible. You were never really comparing Aeroflot to Pan Am or to Delta. You were comparing it to the entire civil aviation system of a superpower, packed into one organization. As far back as 1963, an Aeroflot deputy director admitted the only fair comparison was against every American airline combined. But there was a dark side to running aviation this way: safety. Crashes were state secrets, buried by a system that did not answer to passengers. Across the Soviet decades, more people died in Aeroflot accidents than on any other airline in history. The giant was mighty. It was also fragile in a way nobody could see, because a state-sized airline depends completely on the state that feeds it. And in 1991, that state simply ceased to exist. So what happens to the largest airline in history when its country disappears overnight? It did not shrink, it shattered. When the Soviet Union dissolved, Aeroflot was carved into more than 300 separate airlines. Some counts run far higher, into the hundreds more. They earned a nickname, the Baby Flots. Names like Crassair and Tatarstan Airlines. Many were single aircraft operations run by people who had inherited one jet, one route, and almost no money. The results were grim. Underfunded, barely maintained, thrown into a collapsing economy. By the mid-1990s, the safety record of these spin-offs was among the worst on the planet, and it dragged the famous name down with it. This should have been the end. The proudest airline in the world, smashed into hundreds of dangerous fragments. But the core held on. The mothership kept the crown jewels, the international routes, the Moscow hub at Sheremetyevo, the name and that hammer and sickle on the tail. In 1994, it became a joint stock company, and almost half of it was handed to its own employees. Then it did something the Soviet version never could. It went shopping in the West. Out went the rough home-built fleet. In came the Airbus A310, the Boeing 737, and the Boeing 777. The crash rate fell away. The service improved. And in 2006, the airline that had been the very face of the Soviet Union joined SkyTeam, a global alliance led by Air France, KLM, and Delta. The old enemy's airlines, now its partners. By the 2010s, Aeroflot was respectable, modern jets, a proper loyalty program, awards, steady growth, a normal, competitive, global carrier. So sit with that for a moment. This airline had already survived the total collapse of its own country. It rebuilt itself from hundreds of broken pieces into a member of a Western alliance. What on earth could possibly knock it down a second time? Well, that was actually February of 2022. And the blow arrived from the very West it had spent 20 years buying from. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the response struck Aeroflot in its softest spot, its aircraft. Most of those gleaming Airbuses and Boeings were not owned by Aeroflot. They were leased from Western firms, a great many based in Ireland. Sanctions ordered the lessors to take their planes back. Around 400 jets across Russian carriers were suddenly demanded home. Russia refused. It rewrote its own law, re-registered the foreign aircraft onto a Russian registry, and kept them. Then it began paying to make the seizure permanent. The state set up a scheme, lending airlines money from its national wealth fund over 15 years at just 1.5% to buy the jets out from under their owners. By 2025, Russia had spent at least $5.6 billion this way, with close to 300 billion rubles drawn from that fund. Aeroflot alone agreed to settle 228 aircraft. There was a deeper problem buried under the ownership fight. Many of these jets had been registered abroad in Bermuda, and until that registration was torn up, they could not safely fly international routes without risking seizure on the tarmac. So Russia did not simply buy the planes. It rebuilt the legal paperwork of an entire fleet from scratch. In one deal with the giant lessor AerCap, insurers paid out around $645 million for 17 of Aeroflot's jets and 5 engines, and those lessors were left fighting their own insurers over at least $8 billion in losses. But money cannot conjure a spare part that nobody will sell you. Boeing and Airbus walked away completely. No new components, no certified maintenance, no software updates. So Aeroflot reached for the oldest trick in a cornered fleet's playbook, cannibalization. Those 8 jets being torn apart in that opening hangar are not a breakdown, they are the plan. Strip the grounded planes to keep the flying ones in the air and chase gray market parts through countries like China, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. It is working, at least for now, but it is brutally expensive. In early 2026, Aeroflot's bill for keeping its Western jets airworthy ran more than double the year before. Its mainline fleet now sits at around 171 aircraft, with an average age creeping past 10 years, older than it would ever normally allow. The wider group, over 300. I can hear you thinking out loud, so is it actually safe? Here is the honest answer, to both sides of it. In February 2026, a senior Russian aviation official admitted that close to 480 aircraft had been flagged for safety violations. from falsified maintenance paperwork to unapproved modifications. That is, to say the least, genuinely alarming. But here is the other side. Most reported incidents have hit the aging regional fleet, not the big long-haul carriers like Aeroflot. For the average passenger flying Moscow to Sochi, the trip is still, statistically, very safe. The real danger is not this morning's flight. It is the calendar. A cannibalized fleet has an expiry date. You can only strip so many jets before you run out of donors to strip. Russia knows this. Its bet is to replace the entire Western fleet with aircraft of its own. The Yakovlev MC-21, the Superjet 100, the revived 2214, all built at home, beyond the reach of any sanction or any lessor's phone call. The stated target is a group fleet of more than 500 aircraft by 2030, packed with Russian metal. Now, here is the catch. Those programs have been promised for years, and delayed again, and again, and again. The first MC-21 deliveries keep sliding to the right, and some analysts warn Russia's usable Western fleet could shrink by as much as half as parts dry up and jets are grounded for good. And the threat is not only mechanical. In July 2025, Aeroflot was hit by something no spare part can repair: a cyberattack. Pro-Ukrainian hackers calling themselves Silent Crow, working alongside a Belarusian group, claimed they had been buried inside Aeroflot's network for a year. Then they pulled the trigger. Around 7,000 servers destroyed, roughly 22 terabytes of data taken, more than 100 flights canceled in a single day, with passengers stranded across the country. They threatened to release the personal records of every Russian who had ever flown the airline. The attackers signed off with the words, "Glory to Ukraine." The damage ran into millions of dollars, and the Kremlin called the whole thing a wake-up call. That is the box Aeroflot now lives inside. Too proud and too strategic to be allowed to fail, too cut off to ever fully recover. Held aloft by government billions, gray market parts, and the slow dismantling of its own airplanes. And the bigger question reaches far past Russia. No major airline has ever tried to run a modern global fleet while shut out of the companies that build it, service it, and insure it. Aeroflot is the live experiment. Either it proves a great power can fly entirely on its own metal, or it shows the world that no airline, however mighty, can outrun the people who make its parts. Here is what I keep coming back to. Aeroflot is not really a story about Russia, and it is not really a story about sanctions. It is a story about how astonishingly hard it is to kill a national airline. 3 times this carrier hit the floor. The jet age nearly outran it. Its own country dissolved beneath it. The entire Western world cut it off, and still, every single time, it refused to vanish. Because a flag carrier is never just a business. It is a symbol, and symbols are the last thing a government will let die. That same stubbornness is why, in 2026, the badge on the tail is still a hammer and sickle. An empire collapsed around that emblem, but the airline kept flying it anyway. So I want to know what you think. If an airline can survive losing its country, its fleet, and its access to the entire Western world, is there anything left that can truly bring a flag carrier down? Or are some airlines just too political to ever be allowed to die? Tell me in the comments, because honestly, I go back and forth on this one. And if you made it all the way here, do me a favor. Hit the like button and subscribe to Explained so the next video finds you. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.